One of the most famous sayings is, I'd rather be on the ground wishing I were up there, rather than being up there wishing I were on the ground. My first solo experience of flying, it was a cold afternoon, kind of overcast, but enough visibility for me to take that solo flight. I just kept running through my mind the fundamentals of what I've been taught. There was a sense of exhilaration and accomplishment of that. I've been flying airplanes since 2004, about 8 years. And by the way, I'm a priest. Hi, Bonnie.
Good morning, Father Phil.
He asked me to go up with him the first time. Yeah, I was thrilled, ready to go. Let's go. Yeah.
He did let me fly the plane. It wasn't too long. He's like, I think you better take it back over. Yes.
What intrigues me about flying is the fact that it provides for me a sense of freedom and some sense of escape from everyday things. To get up there at elevation and just experience the world below, and just be in tune with the machine that I'm flying, it really kind of helps me focus my mind in a different way. And yeah, it's just exciting, energizing, and it brings me a sense of life in a different perspective, a different way. Grew up about 2.5 miles from my parish church, and so we were pretty close to the church and relatively active in the parish. I remember all of my priests throughout my youth, but one in particular that came into our lives as our pastor and really had a profound influence on me was Father Carl Roulet. A good priest, but also fun-loving. He had other things that he did that were not unusual, but kind of exciting to see from a priest. He, being a good example or a model for me, gave me the understanding that priesthood was more than just saying Mass on Sundays, and it wasn't a monotonous, boring lifestyle, but you could really integrate all sorts of different interesting activities into your life that really added a lot of spice to life, a lot of interests. So I might have different hobbies than he had, but he was kind of the guy that really kind of inspired me to embrace priesthood, but also embrace life itself. I did go to University of Iowa for a couple of years in pre-med, but really felt a sense of, oh, I wasn't settled. I was still struggling with this whole notion of how do I make this, how do I make my mark in the world? How do I make a difference? I feel like a rock star. And I always was a person inclined to be of service to other people, so that was probably my primary directive in going into medicine. But during those first 2 years of college, I really struggled with that. How do I express myself in the best way possible with the gifts and talents I have? Stuffing is good.
Meatballs.
Okay.
I feel like meatballs. Yeah.
How about livers and gizzards?
No.
I think that was a subtle and soft way that God kind of invited me back into that whole consideration of being a priest. I had this really kind of sense of revelation that I need to give this the opportunity it deserves. You need two things to fly airplanes, or at least to learn how to fly, and it's time and it's money. So I got my private pilot's license in the 152, I got my instrument rating in the 152, and I got my commercial pilot's license. It's a different plane actually, it's an Arrow, Piper Arrow, which is a step up from this. This is an Archer 2. There's 3 levels, or yeah, 3 levels? Or 3 levels of Archers, 1, 2, and 3. Archer 2, this model was built in 1978. It's four-seater, got 180 horsepower up front. It's a fixed prop and fixed gear, so it's a standard airplane. A lot of people get their training either through an Archer nowadays or a 172 Cessna high wing plane. So it meets my needs. Maybe eventually I'd like to work myself up to a faster, more capable airplane, but right now, pretty content with this one. Being in college and discerning the possibility of going into the seminary, that was a difficult decision for me to make in terms of surrendering to that vocation. I think by and large, young people today, whenever it comes to topics of religion and faith, they're pretty much private about that. Having a brother or a sister, who's interested in religious life and all that stuff, it brings a sense of discomfort, or it's uncomfortable for people to think that, he's given his life for this. So I struggled with that through 2 years of college at Iowa, and then finally made the decision, by the grace of God, to transfer to a different school, to Loras College, that has a college seminary program. Seminary is not only about academic studies, that's important, you get your master's degree and all that stuff too, but it's also about human formation and really discerning what life would be like as a priest, and that means to be a celibate male and also to be a person who's under the vow of obedience, the promise of obedience, and to really dedicate yourselves for the good of everyone. What that meant was really kind of confronting those questions and those sacrifices, such as celibacy. And that was probably the main one. Can I live a life, a happy life, without being married and having children, being dedicated to the church and the service of God's people? Introduce them, I would like you to help me congratulate our Viking High School football team. Every day, it was affirmed. I've been a priest here in Decorah. It's going on my 6th year now. It's a distinct joy and a pleasure to be involved in people's lives during the best of times, births, weddings, anniversaries, but also during the worst of times, deaths, struggles, all those things. And when people reach those particular points of life, it's again a distinct pleasure and a real grace moment to be invited into their lives in that respect, to bring sort of the presence of Christ alive in their hearts. It's very unique, but very powerful. Wow. When people see a priest or think of priesthood, they think, it's humdrum, boring, monotonous sort of work, and you're enclosed all the time, and you're in church all the time. But when I throw out the fact that I'm a pilot, they really get interested. And so they never think of those two meeting up, the priest and pilot together. So that adds a little bit more of a spin on my conversations and an attraction to the whole nature of being a priest and being a pilot. I really consider my life a gift from God. And being a gift, and God's intention is for us to enjoy that. And so we take that gift for what it is and what it's worth, and it's precious. And we know that we only have so much time in this world. Yeah, I would say to anybody who's thinking about their life's future and what direction that they're going to go, it has to be something that's fulfilling and life-giving. But it has to be more than just work. And that's why I think a balanced life is so important, because I think your extra hobbies or other outlets are going to feed you. They're going to make you better at your work. It's going to benefit your individual life, but also your family life, and certainly your faith life. It's important for me as a Catholic priest to be faithful to the Church and her teachings, but also teach and invite and encourage others to do the same. there was a day and age where people immediately offered you respect. But today, you have to earn that. People today, I think more than any other time, are a little bit more caught up in themselves. And that's a real struggle when you're trying to convey this whole sense of communion or being communal in a culture that's pretty much individual. So that's tough. Boy, the world's a big place, and there's something bigger than me that's created all this stuff. And so I wish people would have that sense of perspective, because I think they would live life a little more differently, and they would appreciate how big God is, but how much God offers us. I don't know if I've ever considered life outside of priesthood. It's important for everybody, no matter what vocation or lifestyle you have something that kind of enriches you outside of work.
Therefore, O Lord, we humbly implore you, by the same Spirit, graciously make
We can be work, and at the end of the day, you can kind of sit back and say, well, is this what life's all about? As priest, I have a different perspective. As I serve God's people and work in the church and really encourage people to live holy lives, I'm looking at things from, in a sense, God's perspective. As a pilot, that's another perspective, because in a sense, I'm looking at the world perhaps maybe as God sees the world. When you get up there, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet, and you look over all the landscape and how big things are, it's incredible. It is a different way to have a spiritual connection to God, and it's just amazing how, it's hard to put to words, but you have to experience it. But it's amazing, how small our worlds can be, but then to have that experience of flying, how big the world becomes.